Are you ready?
It's gonna be a hot girl disco summer. I'm never doing that again. I apologize. Why did I do that? Why did I do that? Here, let's fix it. Something cool. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's your boy, Big Draft Energy. I got you guys on our Week 8 running back rankings video. Right now, if you miss out on this week's must-start running backs, your season might actually be cooked. Again is here when guys like Gibbs, Kyron, Genty, Echan, K9, the Cardinals mess of the RB room until Trey Benson gets back, all are missing time due to a bye week. The margin of error becomes so small that you might lose the week if you don't listen carefully about the game scripts, the matchups, and the volume. Now that I got your attention, let's lock in and dive into our top 23 running backs to play this week. Coming in at number 1 is none other than Mr. Bijan Robinson against the Miami Dolphins. He has one of the most advantageous matchups on the week against this Dolphins putrid defense. The Dolphins allow an average of the third most points to opposing running backs, 25.3. They're tied for the 7 most rushing touchdowns allowed per game to opposing running backs, so we like Bijan for an anytime touchdown. They allow 0.71 in that department. Number 1 most rushing yards allowed per game at 128.29 rush yards allowed, so we love him over his rushing yards. Number 7 in most receptions allowed to opposing running backs, allowing 4.71 receptions. Number 5 in most receiving yards allowed on the week to opposing running backs at 41.29. So we absolutely love Bijan Robinson. This is our S tier, by the way, and he's our RB1. Our RB2, and I was tossing back and forth, and yesterday I had Jonathan Taylor as my RB1. Today he's my RB2 against the Tennessee Titans defense. The Titans allow the 4th most fantasy points PPR format, and everything we talk about is PPR format, by the way. To opposing running backs, they allow 24.8 fantasy points per game. They allow the most rushing touchdowns per game at 1.43. So we like him for not just an anytime touchdown, but 2. Sorry, allergies. It's freaking freezing outside. Number 4 most rushing yards allowed per game. So we also love Jonathan Taylor for over his rushing yards, 113.57 rushing yards there. Coming in number 3 is Christian McCaffrey versus the Houston Texans. And now this isn't the most advantageous matchup on the week. Where it is advantageous is the Texans allow the 3rd most rushing touchdowns per game at 1.17, and they allow 18.7 fantasy points per game. With the lingering injuries to the wide receivers not being 100%, with the absurd amount of volume and controlling the time of possession and a terrible offense on the other side, Christian McCaffrey has RB1 upside on a weekly basis, and I don't care how good this defense is. Coming in at number 4 and rounding out our S tier is going to come as a shocker to some people because he hasn't been as great, and neither has this team. But I love Derrick Henry this week. He's number 4 here. And the Chicago Bears, up until their bye week, was one of the most advantageous matchups for running backs. I anticipate that's going to stay the same. It's a number 10 matchup on the week for RBs in PPR format, allowing 20.9 fantasy points per game. They allow the 5th most rushing yards per game as well, and they do hemorrhage a lot of rushing touchdowns. Starting out, our A tier is Josh Jacobs, and he would be higher had he not been dealing with the injury this past week. Should he get a full workload and be 100% ready to go, he is easily a top 3, top 2 running back against this Pittsburgh Steelers defense. The Steelers allow 18.1 fantasy points per game to running backs, 11th most rushing yards per game, 97.50, and the 10th most receiving yards to running backs, which is very sneaky upside at 30.50. This Pittsburgh Steelers defense has been pretty bad, and they just got torn apart by Chase Brown and that putrid offensive line for the Cincinnati Bengals. I anticipate that Josh Jacobs is going to have a big game if he's 100%. Somebody else who has been really disappointing, this may come as a hot take, is number 6, Saquon Barkley, in the revenge matchup against the New York Giants. The New York Giants stopped Saquon Barkley. He did find the end zone 2 or 3 weeks ago on Thursday Night Football, where it was a blowout loss for the defending champions. The game is at the Lincoln Financial Field. So the Giants allow the 13th most fantasy points to running backs PPR format, 19.6 per game. Tied for 7th most rushing touchdowns allowed at 0.71. And there's a big cluster of teams that are tied there. And the 13th most rushing yards per game at 96.29. I anticipate that Mr. Saquon Barkley is going to bounce back in such a way. Coming in at number 7 is Mr. James Cook, coming off of his bye week. And look, it's the Carolina defense has not been, very, very easy to get they haven't been an easy matchup like they have been in the past. But I anticipate with the volume, the offensive line, the entire game script, James Cook is going to eat and eat in such a way. Coming in at number 8, another one that people are going to hate, but I don't care. You want to start your running backs against the Cincinnati Bengals, and coming in at number 8 is Brees Hall. Cincinnati gives up the most PPR points to running backs, allowing 28.4 fantasy points per game. I think Isaiah Davis is a fantastic sleeper pick, especially with all the running backs we alluded to at the beginning of the video on a bye. Tied for sixth most rushing touchdowns allowed at 0.86. Tied for second most rushing yards allowed per game at they stand alone second most rushing yards allowed per game at 122.71. Sixth most receptions allowed at 5, well within Brees Hall's game. Well within the game script. I don't care who's the quarterback, he's still going to eat. They give the third most receiving yards allowed to running backs at 44.29 and the fifth most receptions to running backs on the week at 5.14. Coming in at number 9 is Javonte Williams in a revenge match against his former team, the Denver Broncos. And listen, this isn't a fantastic matchup, but he's been fantastic and he's played well across the board in every single matchup, and he's going to continue to do so because the scheme's been good. So we'll talk about where Denver is somewhat advantageous. They allow 17.5 PPR points to running backs on the weekly. Seventh most receiving yards allowed per game to running backs at 38.57, well within his wheelhouse. And they give up the most yards per reception to running backs. So we love the over on his longest reception prop, which I believe is at 10.5 right now on Drafters Fantasy. Sign up on Drafters using promo code DISCO to double your first deposit, dollar for dollar, up to 100. And now we're going to enter the B tier. And I understand if people are offended that Devon Achane is my RB10. But the Miami Dolphins is a nightmare, and the Atlanta Falcons isn't really good. So we'll talk about where it's advantageous. When we're talking about PPR format, the Falcons allow the 15th most fantasy points per game on the week at 20 fantasy points per game, and they allow the 14th most rushing yards per game at 95.50. We anticipate that there's going to be a ridiculous amount of volume going towards Devon Achane. He's not somebody I'm completely bullish on, not somebody who I absolutely love, especially in the DFS streets. I think there are some better running backs to pay up for in DFS, but if you have him in your redraft lineup or your dynasty lineup, you have no choice but to play him. I just don't love the matchup this week, and I also don't love the Miami Dolphins. Coming in number 11 is J.K. Dobbins, and this is a fantastic matchup against the Dallas Cowboys defense. They give up the 6th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs at 23.2, tied for 7th most rushing TDs allowed at 0.71 in that cluster, 8th most rushing yards allowed per game at 103.43, tied for second most receptions allowed to RBs at 5.43. So this could also be fantastic sleeper play for Mr. RJ Harvey, and the second most receiving yards allowed to running backs per game at 53.86, and the fourth most yards per reception at 9.92. Coming in at number 12 is Mr. Cam Scatterable. I love that profile picture that I have for him here on these slides, and these slides are fucking fantastic. With that being said, he did absolutely destroy and demolish the Philadelphia Eagles last time we saw him. He's found the end zone 3 times. He almost rushed for 100 rushing yards. He was absolutely fantastic, and it's a great matchup. And the reason why we don't have him a little bit higher is because I anticipate that the Eagles are going to 100% adjust to Cam Scatterable. But with that being said, it's a plus matchup. Eagles allow the 8th most fantasy points per game to running backs at 21.6, 5th most rushing TDs allowed per game at 1 per game. So we do like him for an anytime touchdown. 15th most rush yards allowed per game at 94.71, and the 8th most receiving yards allowed per game to opposing running backs at 32.0. Coming in at number 13 is Mr. Jordan Mason. He would be higher if Aaron Jones wasn't in the lineup, and I will probably end up bumping him up higher. He's a must start. He's a smash start. I absolutely love him because the Chargers have been atrocious stopping the run lately, allowing the 9th most fantasy points per game to running backs in PPR format, 21.2 per game. They give up the 4th most rushing touchdowns per game at 1.14 and nearly 92 rushing yards on average. But check this, the last 3 weeks, they allowed Jonathan Taylor to go for 34.2 fantasy points. They allowed Devon Achane the week prior to go for 31. And the week before that, they allowed Corey Krosky-Merritt to go for 27. They're leaking yards and touchdowns everywhere. Jordan Mason's scripts, screens run it down their throat, and he's going to. Coming in at number 14 is Mr. DeAndre Swift. We absolutely love DeAndre Swift in this matchup. But I will say, because across the board, it's one of the best matchups on paper. And I will say this, the only reason why he's not higher is 1, Kyle Monangai is dipping into a lot of his production. 2, a lot of the players in the Baltimore Ravens defense will be healthier coming off of their bye and in the lineup. So I'm very curious to see how this plays out. But nevertheless, let's talk about the matchup. This is the number 2 matchup for RBs on the week when it comes to PPR format. They allow 26.5 fantasy points per game. Third most rushing TDs allowed at 1.17. It's number 6 most rushing yards allowed per game at 109.67. Fourth most receptions allowed at 5.17. Sixth most receiving, I just bit my fucking tongue. Sixth most receiving yards allowed per game to running backs at 39.67. Coming in at number 15, and he should be higher, but the Patriots defense has been absolutely outstanding, is Mr. Quinshawn Judkins. It's the number 22 matchup on the week. It's not a good matchup. The Patriots only allow 15.3 fantasy points per game to running backs. Where it's advantageous is the Patriots are tied for second most receptions allowed to running backs on the week at 5.43, and the fourth most receiving yards allowed per game on the week to running backs at 41.57. And when I talk about on the week, because there's 6 teams on the bye, some of those guys give up more receptions, more rushing yards, more of the statistical category. But on the week, it's very advantageous in that department. All right, coming in number 16, and there's no slide for this, guys, Rachaad White against the New Orleans Saints. It's the number 11 matchup for running backs in PPR format. They allow 20.8 fantasy points per game. They're tied for 7th most rush TDs allowed at 0.71, 7th most rushing yards allowed per game at 104. And that's going to round out our B tier. Starting in our C tier, we got Chase Brown against the New York Jets, and Chase Brown looks like he's getting a little bit better. The Jets only give up the 17th most fantasy points to running backs at 18.7, but they also give up the 10th most rushing yards per game at 100.29. When that offense is on the field, they hardly move the ball. They hardly do anything. It's going to be Breece Hall and maybe a little bit of Mason Taylor, but look for the Cincinnati Bengals to control the time of possession to keep the other offense off of the field. If the other offense is the Jets offense isn't keeping themselves off the field, because it's just been absolutely putrid. All right, number 18, we got Mr. Jalen Warren against the Green Bay Packers. It's one of the worst matchups in the week. The Packers only allow 14.5 fantasy points per game to running backs, but where it's advantageous is the Packers give up the most receptions to running backs on the week. So PPR format, like I alluded to earlier, is what we're talking about. This is a fantastic matchup for him to get his receptions, but they hardly give up any sort of receiving yards or any sort of rushing touchdowns. So one to pay attention close. When you got 6 running backs on a bye, he kind of has to be in that must start area. Speaking of must start, this one's confusing, but there's a lot of signs indicating that this should be a fantastic matchup for Alvin Kamara, and I wanted to be higher on him, but there's a lot of things holding him back, like the usage. But Kendra Miller's out for the season now with an ACL, so hopefully the usage gets a little bit more uptick. I also don't like how they've been using him in the receiving game. He hasn't been what he has been in the past as an elite volume pass catcher and receiver out of the backfield. But where the Buccaneers is an advantageous matchup for Alvin Kamara is they give up the 7th most fantasy points per game to running backs at 22.6, 6th most rushing touchdowns allowed. They're tied in that department at 0.86, 3rd most receptions allowed. Hello, this screams Alvin Kamara. They allow 5.29, number 1 most receiving yards allowed per game at 61.57, and the 2nd most yards per receptions to running backs at 11.65. Coming in at number 20, it could be Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, and I got the next 3 all jumbled. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt's 20. Pacheco is against the Chiefs, but I'm not anticipating that this is going to be a fantastic outing for him, because where it's advantageous is the receiving yards. I think McNichols could be a sneaky sleeper play, but Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, just based off of the volume and no Jaden Daniels, should potentially be there. Fingers crossed, but him and McNichols are completely interchangeable, and they're both flexible this week. 21, Isaiah Pacheco. I'd like to have him a little bit higher, but his usage has been very inconsistent. They have 3 running backs in that room, and it's a fantastic matchup for the receiving back. I like Brashard Smith a little bit more than Pacheco, but Pacheco has been getting the vast majority of the snaps, so we'll put him at 21. 22 is Chuba Hubbard, and he has a fantastic matchup against the Buffalo Bills, but so does Rico Dowdle. So these guys dip into each other's production, and it's going to be a shared back room, and I don't really like ranking up shared backrooms, but it's fantastic because Buffalo is the number 5 matchup for running backs PPR format, allowing 23.9 fantasy points per game. The 2nd most rush touchdowns allowed per game to running backs at 1.33. The 3rd most rushing yards allowed to running backs at 116, and the 8th most receptions allowed. But it could be Chuba, it could be Rico Dowdle, could be neither, because these guys are coming off of a bye and what have you. Ramondre Stevenson is rounding out our top 23 running backs, and it's a freaking horrible matchup against the Cleveland Browns, but he is getting a lot of volume. I'm okay playing Trayvon Henderson because I feel like there's a little bit of receiving upside there. So when we're looking at our tiers, We got S tier, Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Taylor, CMC, Derrick Henry. A tier, Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, James Cook, Breece Hall, Javonte Williams. B tier, Devon Achane, J.K. Dobbins, Cam Scatterbo, Jordan Mason, DeAndre Swift, Quinshon Judkins, Rashad White. C tier, we got Chase Brown, Jalen Warren, Alvin Kamara, Ja'Cory Krosky, Merritt, Bill, Isaiah Pacheco, Chuba Hubbard, and then finally we got Mr. Ramondre Stevenson. I really want Travion Henderson to freaking do something. If you guys like the video, like the freaking video. Shout out to our sponsors, Drafters Fantasy. Use promo code DISCO to double your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. Shout out to our other sponsors, Better Vision, the best place to consolidate all of your fantasy football and betting into one place for your Sundays. And shout out to our sponsors, Bull Rush. Shout out to my business partner, Sleazebomb. We run the Guys FF Patreon and Premium Discord. It's one of the best, fastest growing discords and communities just in fantasy football, period, where everybody has the same mindset and the same love for fantasy football, and we're all winning together. We are growing on a daily basis, and it's been such a blessing to get on this journey. You guys could catch us live tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern time as I'm recording this. This is Thursday, so prior to the Thursday Night Football showdown between the Minnesota Vikings and the Los Angeles Chargers. Bring your start set questions there. We'll gladly answer them. If you guys have any sort of questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. Like the video, subscribe if you haven't. Appreciate you guys. And we're going to be posting the same sort of content shortly, briefly, hopefully, for all other positions. But yeah, appreciate you guys. And check out this video here. This is the Game Script Gods, guys who are just going to absolutely dominate this week. Until next time, which is shortly. Peace. Time for the best outro in fantasy football.